The scorched rope left angry welts on Elira's wrists as Xander Vernon stared in disbelief at the young Apache woman tied to his fence post. Her dark eyes, filled with both defiance and fear, caught the dying light of an Arizona sunset. It was 1879, and life on the outskirts of Benton, Arizona territory, had taught him to expect trouble, but nothing like this. "Good Lord," Xander muttered, pulling his hunting knife from his belt. The woman flinched as he approached, her body tensing beneath the simple buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, though he knew she likely didn't understand English. As Xander cut through her bindings, he noticed dried blood on her temple and the purple bruising around her left eye. Someone had beaten her and left her here, but why? His nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and Benton itself was another 10 beyond that. This was no coincidence. The woman collapsed the moment her hands were freed, legs giving out after what must have been hours of standing. Without thinking, Xander caught her, feeling her body trembling against his. She was too light, and he realized she must not have eaten in days. "My name is Xander," he said slowly, pointing to himself. "Xander Vernon." He gestured to his small homestead, a sturdy cabin with a corral for his horses, and the beginnings of what would someday be a proper ranch. "You're safe here." The woman's gaze followed his gesture, then returned to his face. After a moment's hesitation, she placed a hand against her chest. "Elira," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst. Xander nodded, relief washing over him. At least they could communicate that much. He helped her toward the cabin, aware of how she favored her right leg. Inside, he eased her into his only chair and went to fetch water. When he returned with a tin cup, Elira drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. Xander busied himself preparing a simple meal of beans and dried venison, stealing glances at the mysterious woman who'd appeared on his property. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with features that spoke of quiet strength beneath her current vulnerability. Her long black hair was tangled and dirty, but he could see it had once been carefully braided with decorative beads now lost or broken. "Why were you tied to my fence?" he asked, knowing she wouldn't understand but needing to fill the silence somehow. To his surprise, Elira responded in broken English. "Bad men, take from village, I fight." She mimicked throwing a punch, then pointed to her bruised face. "They leave me," Xander frowned. "Bandits, soldiers." He knew all too well the tensions between the U.S. cavalry and the Apache. The newspapers in Benton were full of stories about skirmishes and broken treaties. Elira shook her head. "White men, not soldiers." She made a gesture as if drinking from a bottle. "Take women. Kidnappers, then." Probably intending to sell her somewhere downriver. It made Xander's blood boil, thinking of the human trafficking that still plagued the territories despite efforts to stamp it out. "Your people, your family?" he asked, making a sweeping gesture to indicate a larger group. Elira's face clouded. "Looking, maybe." She tapped her chest. "Kairikahua." Xander nodded. The Kairikahua Apache were known for their fierceness but also for their strong family bonds. If Elira had been taken from them, they would indeed be searching, which might bring its own problems to his doorstep. As darkness fell, Xander gave Elira his bed, taking the floor for himself with just a blanket for comfort. It was the proper thing to do, though his back would surely protest come morning. Sleep came fitfully, his dreams filled with pursuing riders and a woman's pleading eyes. Dawn broke with a rooster's crow from the small coop behind his cabin. Xander rose, muscles stiff, to find Elira already awake. She stood at his window, watching the sunrise paint the distant mountains with gold. "Hungry?" he asked, miming eating. She nodded, then surprised him by pointing to his cast iron skillet and making gestures that clearly meant she wanted to cook. Xander hesitated, then stepped aside. Perhaps it would help her feel more at ease. While Elira prepared a simple meal of cornmeal cakes, Xander went outside to tend to his horses and check the perimeter of his property. There were no signs of visitors, but he couldn't shake the feeling that trouble was brewing. Whether from Elira's people coming to search for her, or the men who'd abandoned her here, someone would eventually arrive. When he returned, the cabin was filled with the pleasant aroma of cooking. Elira had found his small cache of wild honey and had drizzled it over the cakes. They ate in companionable silence, the food infinitely better than his usual fare. After breakfast, Xander hesitated, then retrieved a small trunk from beneath his bed. Inside was a dress simple cotton, blue with tiny white flowers that had belonged to his late sister. He held it out to Elira. "For you," he said, "clean." He pointed to her tattered buckskin dress. Elira touched the fabric reverently, then looked at Xander with a question in her eyes. "My sister," he explained, making a gesture to indicate someone his height. "Elizabeth, she died. Fever." He mimicked someone shivering, then closed his eyes. Understanding dawned in Elira's face. She took the dress and nodded solemnly. "Thank you." Xander showed her to the creek behind the cabin where she could bathe in privacy, leaving a bar of soap and a towel on a rock. He busied himself with chores, determinedly not thinking about Elira bathing just beyond the trees. When she emerged, the transformation was startling. Clean, with her hair combed and braided, wearing Elizabeth's dress, Elira looked both beautiful and utterly out of place. The dress was a bit large on her slender frame, but she had tied a leather cord around the waist to make it fit better. Somehow, she'd managed to incorporate elements of her Apache heritage into this frontier woman's clothing. "Better?" she asked, a hint of a smile lifting the corners of her mouth. Xander nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. "Much better," he managed. The days fell into an unexpected routine. Elira helped around the homestead, proving herself knowledgeable about growing things. She found wild plants he'd never noticed and showed him how they could be eaten or used for medicine. Her English improved rapidly, learning from Xander as they worked side by side. At night, they would sit on his porch, watching the stars. Elira would point out constellations, telling him their names in Apache and the stories behind them. Xander found himself looking forward to these moments, when the day's work was done, and it was just the two of them beneath the vast Arizona sky. "My father was trader," she told him on the fifth night. "Learn English from him, from white travelers." "That explains how you speak so well," Xander said. "I was wondering." Elira nodded, her face growing solemn. "Father dead now, 3 winters past, soldier bullets." She made a shooting gesture. "Not aim for him, not care either." Xander's chest tightened. "I'm sorry, Elira. Mother still lives, brothers too, 3 brothers." She held up 3 fingers. "They search for me, I know." The statement hung between them, a reminder that their current arrangement was temporary. Elira had a family, a people who would be looking for her, and when they found her, if they found her, Xander would be alone again. On the 10th day, as they worked together to repair his corral fence, Elira suddenly stiffened. She tilted her head, listening to something Xander couldn't hear. "Riders," she said, her voice tense. "Many." Xander strained his ears and finally caught at the distant thunder of hoofbeats. He reached for the rifle he kept nearby, but Elira placed a restraining hand on his arm. "My people," she said with certainty. "I know sound of their horses." Anxiety flooded through Xander. He'd done nothing wrong, had in fact helped Elira, but relations between whites and Apaches were fragile at best. Would they see it that way? "Should I?" he began, but Elira was already moving toward the cabin. "Wait here," she said firmly. "I speak to them first." Xander reluctantly stayed by the corral as Elira positioned herself in front of the cabin. Within minutes, a group of mounted Apache warriors appeared on the ridge overlooking his homestead. They were an intimidating sight, 12 men, their faces painted for war, carrying rifles and traditional weapons alike. The lead rider raised his hand, and the group halted. He exchanged words with the others, pointing toward Elira. Even from a distance, Xander could see the relief that washed over the man's features. The Apache warriors descended the ridge, approaching cautiously. Elira walked forward to meet them, her head held high despite the oversized dress she wore. Xander remained where he was, his hand never far from his rifle, though he prayed he wouldn't need it. The lead rider dismounted in a fluid motion and embraced Elira. "Brother," Xander guessed from their similar features. Words flowed between them in the Apache language, Elira's voice calm and reassuring, the warrior's questioning and occasionally sharp. Several times, the warrior looked over at Xander, his expression unreadable. Finally, Elira turned and beckoned Xander forward. Heart pounding, Xander approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. Up close, the warriors were even more intimidating, their faces bearing the marks of men who had seen much hardship and battle. "This is my brother Nako," Elira said. "He thanks you for helping me." The warrior, Nako, inclined his head slightly. "My sister says you cut her bonds and gave her shelter," he said in surprisingly good English. "For this, I owe you a debt." "Anyone would have done the same," Xander replied, though he knew that wasn't necessarily true in these parts. Nako's eyes narrowed. "No, many would have left her, or worse." He glanced at his sister, and an unspoken communication passed between them. "We must return to our people. Elira will come with us." Though Xander had expected this, the announcement still felt like a blow. He nodded stiffly, trying not to let his disappointment show. "Of course. That's where she belongs." Elira touched her brother's arm and spoke rapidly in Apache. Nako frowned, shaking his head. She persisted, gesturing toward Xander and then to the homestead. The other warriors watched silently, their expressions giving nothing away. Finally, Nako sighed and turned back to Xander. "We will make camp nearby tonight. Tomorrow we speak more. My sister says there is much to discuss." He mounted his horse in one smooth movement. "We will not trespass on your land without permission." "You're welcome to camp here," Xander offered, surprising himself. "There's a flat area by the creek with good water." Nako considered this, then nodded once. "We accept your hospitality." As the warriors moved toward the creek, Elira remained behind. Her eyes met Xander's, and he saw something there that made his pulse quicken. "What did you say to him?" Xander asked quietly. "I told him you are a good man, that you treated me with respect." She hesitated, then added, "that I wish to stay." Xander's breath caught. "Stay, but your family, there is another way," Elira said. "An old way, but first my brother must know you better." She touched his arm briefly. "Be honest with him, Xander Vernon. Show him who you truly are." Before he could ask what she meant, Elira walked away to join her people, leaving Xander with more questions than answers. That evening, Xander killed one of his chickens and contributed coffee and flour to the Apache camp. They added dried meat and wild vegetables, creating a communal meal around a small fire. The atmosphere was tense at first, but as the night deepened, the warriors began to speak more freely. Nako, seated across from Xander, studied him over the flames. "My sister tells me you live alone." "No wife, no children, no family at all," Xander admitted. "My parents died when I was young, my sister a few years ago." Yet you have claimed much land for one man, another warrior observed, not unkindly. Xander nodded. I'm working it as best I can, hoping to build something that will last. Something to pass on to children you do not have, Nako said, a slight challenge in his voice. Something to contribute, Xander countered. I grow more than I need, trade the extra in town. This seemed to satisfy the warriors, who nodded appreciatively. A man who could produce abundance was respected in any culture. The conversation turned to the men who had abducted Elira. She described them in detail, 5 white men with a wagon, heading south. They had taken 3 women from the Apache camp during a raid, but Elira alone had been abandoned when she proved too troublesome. We found the others, Nako said grimly. Too late. The men will never harm another woman. Xander understood what went unspoken. Justice had been served, Apache style. He couldn't find it in himself to feel sympathy for men who trafficked in human lives. As the fire burned low, Elira told her people about the days she had spent at Xander's homestead. How he had given her his bed, taught her new English words, worked alongside her without complaint. How he had never once touched her inappropriately or made her feel unsafe. Throughout her recounting, Xander felt the weight of Nako's gaze. The warrior was measuring him, testing his reactions, looking for any sign of deception or ill intent. It was unnerving but also understandable. Elira was his sister. Her well-being was his responsibility. Eventually, the Apache warriors retired to their blankets, leaving only Nako, Elira, and Xander by the dying embers of the fire. My sister has made a request of me, Nako said quietly, one I did not expect. Xander glanced at Elira, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, her expression serene. What request? Xander asked, though he suspected he knew. She wishes to remain here. With you. Nako prodded the coals with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Such a thing is not done lightly among our people. I understand, Xander said, though in truth he understood very little of Apache customs. Do you? Nako's gaze was penetrating. If she stays, it cannot be as your servant or your companion. He spoke the last word with distaste. There is only one honorable way. Elira spoke then, her voice soft but firm. Marriage, Xander, by the customs of my people. That is the only way I can stay without bringing shame. Marriage. The word hung in the air between them. Xander had known Elira for less than 2 weeks. Yet in that time he had come to admire her strength, her intelligence, her quiet dignity. There was a connection between them that he couldn't deny. This is not a small thing you ask, Xander said carefully. For either of us. No, Elira agreed. It is a life path. But I have seen your heart, Xander Vernon. I believe our paths are meant to join. Nako stood abruptly. Discuss this between you. I will hear your answer in the morning. He gave his sister a long look, then walked away, leaving Xander and Elira alone by the fire. For a moment neither spoke. The night sounds filled the silence, crickets chirping, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft nickering of horses. Why? Xander finally asked. Why would you choose to stay with me rather than return to your people? Elira considered her answer carefully. When those men took me, I thought I would die, or worse. She gazed into the dying fire. Then I woke tied to your fence, and you appeared like a spirit from my grandmother's stories. You could have done anything to me. Instead, you showed kindness. She looked up, meeting his eyes. Each day here I watched you, how you care for your animals, how you respect the land, how you speak truth even when silent. A small smile touched her lips. My people value these things above all else. But marriage, Xander said, the word still foreign on his tongue. That's, if you do not wish it, say so, Elira interrupted, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her composure. I will go with my brother tomorrow. No shame will come to you. Xander realized with sudden clarity that he didn't want her to leave. These past days with Elira had filled a loneliness he'd scarcely acknowledged. His homestead felt more alive with her presence, not just a place to work, but a home. What would it mean? He asked. Marriage in your tradition. Elira's expression softened. The man provides shelter, protection, food when hunting is good. The woman tends the home, prepares meals, bears children if Creator wills it. She tilted her head. Not so different from your ways, I think, and us, would we? Xander trailed off, unsure how to phrase his question. Become true husband and wife, Elira finished for him. Yes, in time, when trust is built. A blush colored her cheeks. I am not unknowing of such things. Xander nodded, his own face warming. And your brother, your people, would they accept this? It has happened before. Not often, but there are stories. Elira reached out, hesitantly placing her hand over his. My brother would not have allowed this conversation if it was forbidden. Her hand was small but strong, calloused from work yet somehow still soft. Xander turned his palm up, lacing his fingers through hers. If I say yes, he said slowly, I want it to be a true marriage, Elira, not just an arrangement. I would want us to build something real between us. Elira's smile was like the breaking of dawn. That is what I wish also. They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, hopes for the future, fears and dreams alike. When finally they parted to sleep, Xander felt as though he'd known Elira for years rather than days. Morning came with the scent of wood smoke and coffee. Xander dressed carefully in his cleanest shirt and trousers, ran a comb through his unruly brown hair, and steeled himself for the conversation ahead. Nako was waiting by the corral, watching the sun rise over the distant mountains. He acknowledged Xander with a nod. My sister says you spoke until the moon was high, he said without preamble. We did, Xander confirmed. I've made my decision. And Xander met the warrior's gaze steadily. If Elira truly wishes to stay, I would be honored to take her as my wife. Nako studied him for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. It is what she wishes. He glanced toward the creek, where Elira was filling water containers with 2 other warriors, but there are conditions. I expected as much, Xander said. First, you will come to our village. You will be presented to our elders and to our mother. They must approve. Nako's expression was unyielding. Second, you will learn our ways as Elira has learned yours. Third, any children born of this union will know both their father's world and their mother's people. These were reasonable requests, Xander thought. More than reasonable. I agree to all 3. There is one more, Nako said. If you ever bring harm to my sister, any harm I will return, and you will wish those traffickers had found you instead. The threat was delivered calmly, matter-of-factly, which made it all the more chilling. Xander had no doubt Nako meant every word. I would deserve nothing less, he replied, but it won't happen. You have my word. A hint of approval flickered in Nako's eyes. Words are easy. Actions speak truth. He extended his hand, palm up, not in the white man's handshake, but in the Apache way. We leave for the village today. Be ready when the sun reaches midpoint. Xander placed his palm against Nako's, sealing their agreement. I'll be ready. The journey to the Apache village took 3 days of hard riding. They traveled through rugged terrain that Xander had never ventured into, following trails visible only to his Apache guides. Elira rode beside him, occasionally pointing out landmarks or naming plants in both English and Apache. On the second night, as they camped in a sheltered canyon, Nako approached Xander with a small wooden bowl containing a dark paste. For protection, he explained, gesturing to Xander's face. The sun is stronger in the high places. Xander allowed Nako to apply the paste, a mixture of clay, bear grease, and crushed herbs across his forehead and cheekbones. The other warriors nodded approvingly, and Elira's eyes shone with something that looked like pride. Later, she explained in whispers, "My brother has accepted you. This is his way of showing the others that you are under his protection." On the third day, they crested a ridge to reveal a hidden valley below. The Apache village was larger than Xander had expected, perhaps 30 lodges arranged in a traditional circle, with horses corralled nearby and smoke rising from cooking fires. Women moved among the lodges, children played beside a small stream, and elders sat in the shade of a large cottonwood tree. As their party descended into the valley, activity in the village paused. Every eye turned toward them, toward Xander specifically, the only white face among them. He fought the urge to shrink under their collective gaze. Elira moved her horse closer to his. "Be strong," she murmured. "Show no fear, but also no arrogance." They dismounted at the edge of the village. Nako spoke to the gathered crowd in Apache, gesturing toward Elira and Xander. Xander recognized few words, but he understood that Nako was explaining Elira's abduction and rescue. An older woman pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of contained emotion. She embraced Elira fiercely, then stepped back to examine her daughter from head to toe, as if ensuring she was truly unharmed. "My mother," Elira whispered to Xander. "Falora." Falora turned her attention to Xander, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. She was shorter than Elira, but carried herself with unmistakable authority. The silver in her long braids spoke of wisdom earned through years of hardship. "You saved my daughter," she said in accented but clear English. "For this, I am in your debt." Xander bowed his head respectfully. "Your daughter is a remarkable woman, madam. She saved herself in many ways. I merely provided shelter." Falora's eyebrow raised slightly, perhaps surprised by his response. "Nako tells me you wish to take Elira as your wife." "If she will have me," Xander replied, "and if your people approve." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Falora studied him for another long moment, then nodded once. "We will speak more. First, you will meet our elders." What followed was the most thorough examination of character Xander had ever experienced. He was brought before 5 tribal elders, 3 men and 2 women, who questioned him about everything from his family history to his views on the U.S. government's treatment of native peoples. They asked about his intentions toward Elira, his plans for the future, even his beliefs about the Creator. Xander answered truthfully, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Yes, his grandfather had fought against natives during the early Western expansion. No, he did not support the government's policy of forced relocation. Yes, he intended to have children with Elira if they were blessed with them. No, he would not prevent her from teaching them Apache ways. Throughout the questioning, Elira stood nearby, occasionally translating when the elders' English failed them or Xander's answers needed clarification. Her presence steadied him, a reminder of why he was enduring this trial. As the sun began to set, the eldest of the council, a man whose face was etched with the lines of nearly 9 decades, raised his hand for silence. "Xander Vernon," he said, his voice surprisingly strong, "we have heard your words. Now we must listen to the wisdom of our ancestors. Tomorrow, when the sun returns, we will tell you our decision." Xander was escorted to a small lodge at the edge of the village. Food was brought to him, a stew of rabbit and wild vegetables and fresh water for washing. Though no one stood guard, he understood that he was expected to remain there for the night. As he prepared to sleep on the buffalo robes laid out for him, the lodge flap opened. Elira slipped inside, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the evening chill. "I should not be here," she said quietly, "but I wanted to see how you fared." "I've been better," Xander admitted with a wry smile, "but I've been worse too." Elira settled beside him, close but not touching. "You spoke well to the elders, honestly. I figured lying wouldn't help my case. They seem like people who can spot a falsehood a mile away." She nodded. "My people value truth above most things." After a pause, she added, "Are you having second thoughts, Xander? This is your last chance to change your mind without causing offense." He considered the question seriously. The past few days had shown him glimpses of a world very different from his own. If he married Elira, he would forever have one foot in each world, never fully belonging to either. It would not be an easy path. Yet when he looked at her with her quiet strength and gentle spirit, he knew his answer hadn't changed. "No second thoughts," he said firmly. "Whatever the elders decide tomorrow, my heart is set. I want you as my wife, Elira, not because it's convenient or because I feel obligated, but because I believe we could build something beautiful together." Elira's eyes shimmered in the dim light. She reached out, touching his face with trembling fingers. "I feel the same," she whispered. "From the moment you cut my bonds, I saw something in you, a goodness that matched the stories my grandmother told of the ideal man." She leaned forward and very softly pressed her lips to his. It was the briefest of kisses, chaste and sweet, but it sent warmth spreading through Xander's entire body. "For courage," Elira said, drawing back with a smile. "Tomorrow will bring what it brings." After she had gone, Xander lay awake for a long time, replaying her kiss in his mind and wondering what the new day would hold. Dawn came with the beating of drums. Xander rose, washed his face in the basin of water left for him, and dressed in the clean clothes that had mysteriously appeared during the night. His own trail-worn garments were gone. When he emerged from the lodge, he found the entire village gathered in a large circle. In the center stood the 5 elders, Nako, Falora, and Elira. She wore a traditional Apache dress of soft buckskin, intricately beaded and fringed, with her hair woven into elaborate braids adorned with feathers and silver ornaments. She had never looked more beautiful. Nako motioned for Xander to join them in the center. As he walked forward, the drumming intensified, then stopped abruptly when he reached Elira's side. The eldest of the council stepped forward. "Xander Vernon," he said, his voice carrying across the silent gathering, "we have consulted with one another and with the spirits of our ancestors. We have listened to the wind and watched the flight of eagles." Xander held his breath, acutely aware of Elira beside him. "It is decided," the elder continued. "If you still wish it, you may take Elira as your wife, according to the traditions of our people." Relief washed over Xander, so intense he felt momentarily dizzy. "I wish it with all my heart," he said. The elder nodded solemnly. "Then let the ceremony begin." What followed was unlike anything Xander could have imagined. There were prayers in the Apache language, offerings of sacred herbs to the 4 directions, songs that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Elira guided him through each step, murmuring instructions when needed. They exchanged gifts, Elira presenting him with a necklace of polished stones and bear claws that Nako draped around his neck, Xander giving her a silver ring that had belonged to his mother. Though not traditional, the elders approved of the symbolism. Falora wrapped their hands together with a woven cloth, binding them as Nako spoke words of blessing. The cloth would remain in place until sundown, marking them as newly joined. "You are now husband and wife," the eldest declared. "May your path together be long and fruitful." A cheer went up from the gathered Apaches, and suddenly the solemn ceremony gave way to celebration. Drums began again, joined by flutes and singing. Food appeared: venison, wild turkey, corn prepared in ways Xander had never tasted before. The entire village joined in the feast, children dancing around the newlyweds with flowers and colored streamers. Throughout it all, Elira remained by Xander's side, their hands bound together, a physical representation of their new union. She translated conversations, explained customs, and occasionally squeezed his hand in reassurance. As the celebration continued into the evening, Nako approached them. "The binding cloth may now be removed," he said, carefully unwrapping their hands, "but the bond it represents remains." He fixed Xander with a meaningful look. "You are now part of our family, Xander Vernon. This brings both privileges and responsibilities." "I understand," Xander said, though he suspected he had only begun to grasp what those responsibilities might entail. Nako seemed satisfied. "Tomorrow, you and Elira will return to your homestead. But first," he gestured toward a lodge set apart from the others, decorated with flowers and lit by small fires on either side of the entrance. "Tonight, you begin your life together." Elira blushed, but there was happiness in her eyes as she led Xander toward the wedding lodge. Inside, furs and blankets had been arranged to form a comfortable bed. Herbs burned in a small clay pot, filling the air with a sweet, calming scent. "This is the lodge for new couples," Elira explained softly. "It is considered blessed by the spirits." In the flickering light, surrounded by the evidence of her people's acceptance, Xander took his bride in his arms. "I never expected any of this when I found you tied to my fence," he said with a smile, "but I'm grateful for whatever fate brought you to me." Elira reached up to touch his face. "My grandmother would say it was not fate but the Creator's plan." Her eyes held both innocence and knowing. I believe she would be right. That night, as the sounds of celebration gradually faded outside, Xander and Elira consummated their marriage tentatively at first, then with growing passion as trust and desire overcame shyness. Their joining was both an ending and a beginning, the final sealing of a bond that had formed the moment he cut her free. The journey back to Xander's homestead was different from their trip to the village. Now they traveled as husband and wife, accompanied by a small group including Nako and 2 other warriors who carried wedding gifts from Elira's family: blankets, cooking pots, tools, and even 2 fine horses. When they arrived, Xander saw his cabin through new eyes. It was sturdy but plain, lacking the touches that made the Apache lodges feel like homes. Elira, however, looked at it with pride. "Our home," she said, squeezing his hand. "We will make it beautiful together." Nako and the warriors stayed only long enough to help unload the gifts before preparing to depart. As they mounted their horses, Nako turned to Xander one last time. "The next full moon, we will expect you both to visit," he said. "Mother wishes to check on her daughter's happiness." His expression softened slightly. "And to begin teaching you our language properly," Xander nodded. "We'll be there." As Nako turned his horse to leave, he added, "Remember, brother by marriage, what I promised if you bring harm to Elira." "I remember," Xander assured him. "But you have nothing to fear." After the warriors had disappeared over the ridge, Elira and Xander stood hand in hand before their cabin. The future stretched before them, uncertain in many ways but rich with possibility. "What now, husband?" Elira asked, a teasing light in her eyes. Xander grinned and swept her into his arms. "Now, wife," he said, carrying her across the threshold, "we begin." The seasons turned, bringing changes to both the land and the couple who worked it. Under Elira's guidance, Xander expanded his garden to include traditional Apache plants alongside his corn and beans. She showed him how to harvest wild foods he had never noticed before, enriching their diet and reducing their dependence on supplies from town. In turn, Xander taught Elira to ride Western style and to handle his firearm skills she mastered quickly, adding them to her already impressive abilities. Together, they improved the cabin, adding a second room, a proper stone fireplace, and furnishings crafted from local materials. Each full moon, as promised, they traveled to the Apache village. These visits were both joyous reunions and opportunities for learning. Xander's Apache vocabulary grew, and he began to understand the subtle complexities of his wife's culture. Elira warmed to him gradually, especially after seeing how genuinely he tried to respect their ways. In town, reactions to their marriage were mixed. Some settlers treated them with open hostility, refusing to do business with a squaw man. Others were merely curious, watching them with undisguised interest when they came to trade. A few, mostly those who had lived on the frontier long enough to value good neighbors regardless of origin, accepted them without comment. The local marshal, a grizzled veteran named Thomas Harding, made a point of stopping by their homestead occasionally. "Just checking in," he would say, though both Xander and Elira understood he was ensuring their safety as much as monitoring them. "Folks'll get used to you eventually," he told them during one such visit, sharing coffee on their porch. "Seen it before. Mixed couples have it hard at first, but if you mind your business and prosper, most people come around." "And if they don't?" Xander asked. Marshal Harding shrugged. "Then they don't. Can't please everybody in this world." He nodded toward Elira, who was hanging laundry nearby. "Long as you two please each other, that's what matters." As winter approached, Elira discovered she was with child. The news brought joy to both families. Elira traveled to the homestead, bringing traditional medicines and wisdom for her daughter's first pregnancy. Nako and his brothers helped Xander build a proper stable for the livestock and reinforce the cabin against the coming cold. "A child born of both worlds," Nako remarked as they worked. "My sister's son or daughter will have a special path." "And special challenges," Xander acknowledged, thinking of the prejudice they'd already encountered. Nako nodded grimly. "This is true, but also special strengths." He handed Xander another log for the cabin wall. "Our people have faced many challenges. We endure. Your child will have this strength in their blood." Winter passed with Elira's belly growing rounder, the couple sharing the single room of their cabin, keeping each other warm through the cold nights. They talked for hours about the future, about what name their child might have, about the world they hoped to create together. Spring brought new growth to the land, and with it, the birth of their son. After a day and night of labor, attended by Elira and a local midwife recommended by Marshal Harding's wife, Elira delivered a healthy boy with a strong cry and a shock of black hair. They named him Nakola's, a blend of her brother's name and Xander's father's. In the Apache tradition, he would receive another name when he was older, one that reflected his character or accomplishments. For now, this name honored both sides of his heritage. The first 2 years of marriage brought challenges as well as joys. Drought threatened their crops. Bandits raided nearby farms, though they avoided Xander's homestead after word spread that an Apache warrior frequently visited there. Twice, Elira faced discrimination in Benton so severe that Xander had to restrain himself from physical confrontation. Yet through it all, their bond deepened. What had begun as mutual respect and attraction blossomed into profound love. They learned each other's ways, accommodated each other's differences, and built traditions of their own that honored both their backgrounds. When Nakola's was nearly 2, Elira discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy proved more difficult than the first, leaving her exhausted and frequently ill. Xander took on more of the household duties, caring for their son and tending to Elira with a devotion that impressed even Falora. "You have chosen well, my daughter," the older woman remarked during a visit. "He has the heart of an Apache warrior in the body of a white man." Elira smiled tiredly. "I knew this from the beginning, mother. I saw his true self when others saw only his skin." Their daughter arrived during a summer thunderstorm, a tiny, fierce girl with her father's hazel eyes and her mother's determined spirit. They named her Elisama, honoring both Xander's sister Elizabeth and Elira's grandmother Sama. With two small children, the homestead became more lively and more challenging. Xander expanded their cabin again, adding a third room specifically for the children. He hired a local carpenter to craft proper beds and a table large enough for their growing family. By the time Nakolas was 5 and Elisama 3, the family had established a rhythm that balanced both cultures. The children spoke English and Apache with equal fluency. They learned to track game, identify plants, and respect the natural world from their mother and maternal relatives. From their father, they learned to read English books, care for livestock, and navigate the complexities of the settler society. Their regular visits to the Apache village ensured the children knew their mother's people and traditions. Likewise, occasional trips to Benton always as a family, never leaving Elira or the children to face potential hostility alone, kept them connected to the changing territory around them. Arizona achieved statehood in 1912, bringing new laws and new settlers. Some changes were positive: better roads, more consistent mail service, advances in medicine that reached even remote homesteads. Others brought fresh challenges: increased pressure on native lands, stricter enforcement of boundaries, growing tension between the old ways and the new. Through it all, Xander and Elira's homestead thrived. What had begun as a struggling one-man operation became a prosperous small ranch with orchards, gardens, and enough cattle to provide a comfortable living. Their home, once a simple cabin, evolved into a sprawling structure that combined the best aspects of Apache design with frontier architecture: cool in summer, warm in winter, and always filled with the mingled aromas of Elira's traditional cooking and Xander's sourdough bread. As their 30th wedding anniversary approached, Xander looked back on the day he'd found a young Apache woman tied to his fence post with a sense of wonder. How could he have known that single act of kindness would lead to such a rich life? "What are you thinking about, husband?" Elira asked, coming to sit beside him on the porch swing he'd built when her pregnancies made it hard for her to get comfortable in regular chairs. Though her hair now showed strands of silver and fine lines framed her eyes, she was still as beautiful to him as she had been on their wedding day. More so, perhaps, for now her face reflected decades of shared experiences. "I'm thinking about fate," Xander replied, taking her hand. "About how the worst day of your life became the luckiest day of mine." Elira squeezed his fingers. "The Creator weaves patterns we cannot see until they are finished," she said, an echo of her grandmother's wisdom. From the barnyard came the sound of laughter. Nakolas, now a tall, handsome young man of 23, was teaching his younger sister how to shoe a horse. Beyond them, the land stretched green and fertile, testament to years of careful stewardship. "Our pattern is a beautiful one," Xander said softly. Elira leaned her head against his shoulder. "And still being woven," she reminded him. "Nakolas speaks of a girl from the village he wishes to court." "And did you not notice how Elisama looks at the marshal's grandson?" Xander chuckled. "I noticed. I'm old, not blind." He kissed the top of her head. "New patterns branching from ours." "This is how it should be," Elira said with satisfaction. "Life continuing, growing, changing." As the sun set over their land, casting long shadows across the fields they had cultivated together. Xander reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From stranger to rescuer to husband, each step had seemed impossible until it was accomplished. "I love you, Elira Vernon," he said simply. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." She smiled, the same smile that had first captivated him all those years ago. "And I love you, Xander Vernon, in this world and the next." Together, they watched darkness settle over their homestead, secure in the knowledge that what they had built would endure, a legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of compassion at a frontier fence post.